All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You have now arrived at my train of thought. Now, before we get to week 4 and my railway recaps, let's talk about the Alabama-Georgia game and how it was an all-time regular season game. It was amazing. The Alabama offense cooking in the first half. Jalen Milroe is on a Heisman trajectory. Ryan Williams is spectacular, but more on him in a moment. And then Georgia clapping back in the second half and dominating most of that. Alabama crumbling like graham crackers for the majority of that game. The atmosphere looked amazing. And then Beck catches the defense sleeping. Georgia gets the lead for 13 seconds. Hug a Bills fan. And then we get the Ryan Williams masterclass of a catch and run, 75 yards to the crib. Bama wins the game because Carson Beck took a very unnecessary risk at the end with that game-losing interception. Great win for Alabama. I don't think Georgia's cooked, obviously, with the 12-team playoff, but Georgia can't afford anything more than one more loss, it seems like. Great game, great atmosphere, college game they pulled up there, but it was a great win. I just had to talk about it real quick. It was only the second greatest atmosphere because Penn State's whiteout energy was also awesome and is the undisputed king of atmospheres. I've been to a couple. They are tremendous. But now that I got that out the way and the fact that Penn State beat Illinois by 2 scores, Illinois is a good ranked team, let's talk about the railway recap for week number 4. Now, normally I am very much against the New York Giants and Dallas Cowboys playing on prime time at all, ever. This is simple. The Giants usually get bludgeoned by the Cowboys. Daniel Jones looks awful, and the Cowboys are able to stat pad basically by the start of the third quarter. But this wasn't one of those times. CeeDee Lamb was good. Dak was good as well. The Cowboys were very good on defense. Maybe part of that's because the Giants' offense isn't that imposing. But the shocker is that the Cowboys actually stopped the run. Devin Singletary had enough yards to match his jersey number. Unfortunately, in the NFL, you can only wear numbers in the singles or double digits, and Singletary only wears 26. So I didn't go so well, which is saying something considering everybody runs the ball in the Cowboys otherwise. Anyway, this was not a completely terrible game aside from the flags, because there were a lot of those. And another hilarious thing, of Theo Johnson chasing down a Giant safety after what could have been a turnover, but it was not. They are built different in Happy Valley. Speaking of Penn State, Mario Wawari ended the game with a game-sealing NO after a bad Daniel Jones throw, unfortunately after Malik Neighbors went out with a concussion. There were other injuries too. We got the injuries to Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, both will maybe out for a month and change. Devastating injuries for the Cowboys, making this a very Pyrrhic victory. Brandon Aubrey also being proven to be human and not a cyborg after actually missing a kick. That was not on the bingo card. But the Cowboys get the dub anyway and are back to 500 at 2-2. The Bears and the Rams were a bit sluggish, and it probably fits the weather description because the weather didn't look all that great in Chicago on Sunday afternoon. This felt like the first game the Rams have played without those 2 receivers, where they really did miss Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Matt Stafford was efficient, but wasn't really all that dynamic when it came to his passes and the numbers he put up. He had that huge fumble earlier on in the game, which allowed that touchdown for the Bears to kind of sort of get them going in the first half. And then in the second half, the Bears showed their A1 talent at times. DeAndre Swift had that great one. You had that spectacular catch by DJ Moore in the second half. And Chicago, all they had to do was not be dumb, and they won. That's effectively what happened. Caleb Williams continues to look better and more efficient, though he does miss those throws. Those throws are unfortunate that he misses them because he could cause some really good plays if he's just on target. Anyway, Chicago gets the win. They're back to 2-2. The Rams are now 1-3, and the injury situation is not nice, but in time, they could be better. Can the Rams make a move to keep the roster afloat before we get to the second half of the year? Staying in the Midwest, but going into a dome. So the Steelers are used to losing to Joe Flacco from time to time because of that time in Baltimore, and occasionally in Cleveland. But this was a different kind of loss to Flacco. Anthony Richardson played, and he got hurt. Then he came back, and he got hurt again. kind of some malpractice by the Colts to allow him to come back in the game, only for him to get hurt immediately after. But Joe Flacco proceeded to cook, and the Indy offense didn't skip a beat. Jonathan Taylor still looked productive. The Steelers defense didn't cause anywhere near amount of pressure that they usually do to quarterbacks and how they feasted on everyone. Flacco was sacked twice because Pittsburgh will get those, but it just didn't seem like the big-time, heavy-hitter, high-end talent plays that you expect to see from the Steelers. Justin Fields, for the first half, looked like Chicago Bears Justin Fields after becoming a QB1 again. And then he went back to Pittsburgh Steelers Justin Fields in the second half and suddenly looked incredibly productive. He ran for a score. He ran for 2 scores, actually. He threw a touchdown pass. The Steelers looked somewhat productive in the second half. But it just never felt like it was enough. Once the Colts got out to a lead, they weren't going to give it up. And it's a good win for Indianapolis. Ideally for them, the injuries to Jonathan Taylor, who had an ankle sprain, and Anthony Richardson aren't too serious, and they can keep things moving as the season goes on. Now to the felines, and I gotta say this is probably the first and only time I'm going to pick the Carolina Panthers to win a game this season. From the goal line stand on, probably should have known that, Carolina's going to take this L. The Bengals were able to keep them relatively at bay. Burrow threw for 2 scores. That spectacular play by Jamar Chase was in this game as well, where he breaks tackles and goes to the crib. And the Bengals were basically able to hold it down from there. It never really felt like, once we got to the second half, that Carolina was going to come back and win. Maybe they score at some point in time, but it was never going to be, the Panthers are going to make a comeback and drop the Bengals to 0-4. It just never got that far. Cincy needed this win in the worst possible way, and they got this win. And it's another unfortunate loss for Carolina, and this is before they ended up losing Shaq Thompson to a torn Achilles, and now he's out for the year. So now Carolina's lost their first and their second best player to season-ending injuries in the span of a couple of weeks. I'm going to stay in the NFC South, and a rivalry game that is always generally good continued to be good again, but in an entirely different way. Atlanta scored 26 points. They didn't score an offensive touchdown while getting these 26 points. How did they get them? Well, you can get a free 7 when Rashid Shaheed, who was a home run hitter in weeks 1 and 2 and has basically been a ground ball hitter in weeks 3 and 4, opted to fumble the punt in the end zone, giving Atlanta a free 7. They could have got a free 2 if he recovered it, but it's still a free 7. And then David Carr threw a pick 6. So that's already 14 of the points. Young Wei Koo was able to do the rest, but it was not without the Saints putting up a good fight. Taysom Hill scored twice, then he left the game. Rather unfortunate on his part. And the Saints allowed Kirk Cousins to have a little bit too much time. I still wonder when Kyle Pitts is going to be involved in this offense. But I don't need to wonder about Kirk Cousins in late game situations, mostly. He seems very adept at making it happen. He's done so in 2 out of the last 3 weeks. Good win for the Falcons, ugly loss for the Saints. Well, unfortunate loss, not ugly. Unfortunate loss for the Saints when Atlanta didn't score an offensive touchdown and you still lose. Not great for New Orleans, as they kind of sort of come crashing down to earth, and now they're back to 2-2, along with the Falcons. Both these teams have the Buccaneers on their schedule over the next 2 weeks. Atlanta will have them first. I will talk about that game tomorrow. What Tampa Bay did to Philadelphia seemed like a bit of a remix to what happened in the playoff game. Tampa Bay basically smothers the Eagles early. Baker Mayfield dots them up. Mike Evans gets the easy tutty. CJ wasn't there in the playoff game last year, but has made his presence felt once again. For the 4th straight week, he gets cooked by a receiver for a touchdown. It's rather unfortunate on his part. He will get memed because he's rocking the Kobe 8 number. Anyway, Tampa Bay rushed out to a quick lead, a insurmountable lead, and the Eagles were memed to death because of the lack of yardage in the first quarter. It was rough. Saquon Barkley not getting the ball very much at all early on was also kind of dumb. Coaching, that's a problem here. Barkley barely getting the ball in the second half was also kind of dumb. He had that great run to start the second half, and the Eagles scored soon thereafter, but after that, it felt like Barkley was nowhere to be seen. Yes, he and Dallas Goedert had to carry a lot of the load without Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown, but it still felt like they were not as big a factors as they needed to be. The Tampa Bay pass rush was smothering. Vita Vea did his thing. And this game was never really close except for the time spent between block kick, this extra point I mean, and the Eagles getting two to Tampa Bay getting the ball next and putting the score up to another touchdown and basically salting the game away with Baker Mayfield doing his thing. They're a good win for Tampa, a statement win for the Bucs. They're back on track and to 3-1. Suddenly this division is incredibly competitive, but Tampa Bay is the clear class of the NFC South. As for Philly, they've got a lot of questions heading into their bye at 2-2, and it may start with Hurts and Sirianni. Are they on the same page? A, can B, Hurts improve as a passer enough? And C, can they get healthy on offense with their two main receivers? Also, Lane Johnson, he also missed this game. That's kind of an important factor I didn't mention before. And I do need to get something cleared up. Is Brees Huff on milk cartons or on wanted posters? Because it seems like he's either gone missing or he's robbing the Eagles blind because he's getting a whole lot of bread and doing a whole lot of nothing so far. I just need this cleared up. Is he on milk cartons or wanted posters? Let me know. Let me know in the comments. At MetLife on Sunday was a perfect description of how ugly football can be and how ugly the weather can be. Let's start in this Broncos-Jets game with Bo Nix being a pretty much no-show in the first half. He was at least somewhat okay in the second half, but only getting 60 yards is not great. He did throw his first touchdown pass, though. Nice play to Cortland Sutton. So many Jets false start penalties, some of which costing the Jets points. The one on 4th and goal at the 1 probably being the most egregious. Aaron Rodgers was harassed and under siege all day long, and it looked like he was holding his hammy at the very end of that game. He was taking a beating pretty much from start to finish. The game should have ended on the PJ Locke play or what should have been a fumbled scoop score, but they could not challenge Denver because they burned their challenges prior to this. And then the wackiest, of course it's the Broncos and of course it's the Jets, kind of ending happened where both Will Lutz and Greg Zuerlein missed 50-yard kicks. Lutz missed his to the left, Zuerlein to the right, and Denver ended up winning this game because of it, 10-9, where Bo Nix only threw for 60 yards. As for Rodgers, you saw that picture on the sideline with him and the towel over his head. He got his true christening of becoming a New York Jet. All that franchise knows is pain. Tell me when I'm telling lies. Other things that appear to be true. The Jaguars may have bought a lemon at a obscene price. Trevor Lawrence wasn't very good once again in week 4, but I am going to say that I'm not sure I can put all of this on Trevor Lawrence. He wasn't the main reason for this L they took to the Texans, this latest L, because Houston's owned them over the last few years. But he was a reason. He only threw for $169. He did get 2 tutties in there, but only $169 for a guy you're paying that much money to in a couple years. Not the greatest. Without Joe Mixon, and this was felt because they could not run the ball as well as they normally do, C.J. Stroud had to win this game for the Houston Texans. And win this game for the Texans he did. He was very dynamic with the passing. Nico Collins continues to cook people. We got an injury to Stephon Diggs, which was unfortunate, but we did get Stroud taking care of business with Agubawale catching the game-winning score. This was a good win for Houston as they needed to get back on track after basically getting pantsed by the Vikings last week. A fun win for the Texans, a demoralizing loss for the Jaguars, and there will be even more questions asked, like whether Doug Peterson will keep his job, or Trevor Lawrence will keep his money, or the Jaguars will keep losing. I don't know. There's a lot of things going on in Duval County, and most of them are not good. Not good at all. The main event of the 1 o'clock afternoon games featured the Vikings and the Packers, and at first it looked like this was going to be a savage beatdown by Minnesota, and it jumped on 28 points and the turnovers early on and the missed kicks by the Packers, who really do need to get that situation straightened out. That's going to cost them at some point in time as the season goes on. Kind of did in this game, but Minnesota came out swinging. That was a gorgeous throw and catch from Sam Darnold to Justin Jefferson. Jordan Addison came back with a bang with the 2 scores early on. The Vikings were cooking. And then the second half begins, and all of a sudden, the Packers woke up. They had that muffed punt and gift 7 to end the first half, and then they got cooking. Jordan Love started to handle business, especially in the fourth quarter. The third quarter is not really where a lot of the drama happened. The fourth quarter is where it took place, where the Packers put up 22 points in said quarter. They took care of business with Love as they took care of the ball for most of the quarter. And then Jordan Love really did honor Brett Favre appropriately, and hopefully he gets better with the Parkinson stuff. Hopefully he stays healthy, Favre. And through a crushing in on a Byron Murphy, who had a spectacular game. Murphy also forced a fumble in this game. And then he obviously had the fumble by Kraft. Minnesota was able to recover, and Green Bay just ran out of time. Yes, they got to within 2 and had the onside kick attempt, but it was pretty much over in the first half. Green Bay just fell into deep a hole. No shame. Packers will be all right. They're 2-2. They'll be fine. But Minnesota being 4-0 is really opened up a lot of eyes, and they're absolutely going to go up in the power rankings. They can't go up much higher than what they are, or at least were, last week at 3. How far up will they go, though? Let's get to the late games before I can make that kind of decision. We're going to start with the surprise of the league so far, aside from the Vikings, the Washington Commanders. They are rolling. The fact that I could say that Washington actually had to punt is really wild. They didn't punt for 2 games plus. That's how crazy this was. That's how crazy this offense has been. Jaden Daniels is absolutely cooking up teams. Like the 26 of 30, just absurd stuff to see here. You got Brian Robinson doing his thing. You got Jeremy McNichols doing his thing. They ran for 4 scores, by the way, and 218 yards to boot. Like Terry McLaurin doing his thing. Like they are absolutely rolling right now, that offense in Washington. The defense wasn't terrible. Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison got their obligatory tutty early, but then did basically nothing else. For that matter, like James Conner got one too, but that's about it. This was domination by Washington, and they're 3-1, and it looks like a really legit 3-1. Now, if we've learned anything about Cliff Kingsbury, is that they always start fast, and then they always crumble like graham crackers. Can they keep this up just because Kingsbury is not the coach? Instead, he's only the OC. He's doing a great job of it, but can they not choke this time? I'm going to get this out of the way quickly. There was no chance for the Patriots, and this was just another weekly beating by Jacoby Brissett. Straight domination. Bosa eventually got his sacks. The Niners D-line were able to feast. The Niners defense was able to feast. Defensive tutties were scored once by Fred Warner, who is like that, and the Niners dominated this game from pillar to post, and at no point in this game did it feel like the Patriots had a real shot. There's really not much else to say here. Brock Purdy made a couple of really good throws, but this was a merciless beatdown by somebody who has it and somebody who doesn't. Not much else. The Raiders and the Browns were ugly. The game was also kind of sort of interesting. Deshaun Watson was only mid. He wasn't awful, just mid. And yes, he did get ripped off with that holding call that negated the 80-yard touchdown to Amari Cooper. That absolutely should have counted. Anyway, the Browns were pretty good shape after that fumble scoop score, and at 20-16, it looked like, okay, we're gonna get some more points here. They're gonna figure things out, and the Browns may come back and win this game and humiliate the Raiders even more. It turned out we got no more scoring, and we got some crushing sacks at the end of the game for Deshaun Watson, and the Raiders were able to win this game without Max Crosby and without Devontae Adams. They may not have Devontae Adams for much longer, based off of what you're hearing, but this was not a good loss for the Browns, and now they're 1-3, and it's looking bad. And for the Raiders, they're back to 2-2, and at the same time, I don't think anyone really believes in them at all. I can't say I blame anyone for not having faith in the Raiders. People can have faith in the Chargers, and seem to with Jim Harbaugh being there, and the Chargers started out pretty well. They started out 10-0 against the Chiefs, and things looked like, okay, they came to play. They played a perfect first quarter pretty much. Mahomes was harassed all day by Khalil Mack and company. The Chargers defense forced a couple turnovers, one of which led to the injury to Rashee Rice. That's unfortunate to see. Get well soon, Rashee Rice. But the Chargers offense just went cold and went silent. And we never really got to see anything from Herbert after quarter one. That's kind of deflating for the Chargers. And there really wasn't a call that everyone could point to and argue and get upset about that, oh, this bailed out the Chiefs. There really wasn't one of those. Yes, on the go-ahead touchdown drive, there was a holding that was called. I think it was the right call. It looked like it might have been on the wrong guy. And then Kansas City scored. And then the Chargers did nothing on their response. Not a great loss for the Chargers considering they did have a 10-0 lead, but it is the desired outcome for Kansas City fans, and the Chiefs look ugly, yet they survive because of course they do. Next, the 3 Sunday night and Monday night games this past week, 2 of them were bludgeonings, and one was just fun to watch. First, the Sunday night bludgeoning. Derrick Henry goes 87 to the crib to start the game, and it felt like the game was over from then on. Baltimore basically imposed their will and played serious bully ball on the Bills, who, if we've learned anything about Buffalo, is that they're fly in the ointment. If you are physical enough to run the ball directly at them, you can maul them. You can dominate them. Baltimore just gave everyone a blueprint. The Ravens ran for 271 yards, and they tried so hard to get Derrick Henry to 2 bills. But even without that, the Ravens were thoroughly dominant. Josh Allen did get a God mode throw because he's going to get 3 or 4 of them. He only got really 1 or 2 in this particular game. And at no point in said game did it look like the Bills had a shot to deal with the Ravens. The losses of Terrell Bernard and especially Matt Milano were felt heavy in this game. Von Miller's loss over the next month due to his own personal conduct or lack thereof will also be felt. That's an entirely different situation though. Anyway, Baltimore handled business, and now they're back to 2-2, and the bully ball, I think, is what Baltimore is finally using. And if that's the case for the rest of the year, everybody else is in trouble. So, if we've learned anything about Tennessee, it's that Will Levis has self-destruction tendencies. He's basically the NFL's electrode. Self-destruct, boom, you lose. And in this case, it was looking like it was going to start that way. He threw an NO on his first drive, even though Tennessee got to midfield. Unfortunately, Tyler Huntley was just not ready for primetime. He missed throws. That lateral was a bad look to Tyreek Hill. And yes, Tyreek dropped it, but it was a bad look there. After Will Levis blew out his shoulder, they went to Mason Rudolph, and all of a sudden, the Titans had a stable offense. They were not turning over the ball. They were smartly handing it off to Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard, who got the late touchdown, which won some people some money in some parlays and other circles. But anyway, it was Tennessee dominating for once, as opposed to being those who were dominated. Miami just got nothing off the ground offensively. Mike McDaniel's play calling got way too predictable. This was a disaster class for the Dolphins. So, Hard Rock Stadium on the same weekend went from a game that the Hurricanes had no business winning, and not for the Hail Mary that probably should have been a touchdown, but for Brett Pry being dumb and leaving points on the field, which came back to bite them, where the Hail Mary would have been unnecessary, to a Dolphins team that had no business winning. A soul for a soul. And now let's get to the fun game that was on Monday Night Football. This was a lot of points and a lot of creativity and a lot of trickeration that the Lions do. Jared Goff was outstanding. He was perfect in terms of a passer and perfect in terms of a receiver. He caught a touchdown pass even. This was a really good game for Seattle. Kenneth Walker scored 3 times, and the Seahawks offense was still dynamic. They just ran into an offense in Detroit that's even more dynamic. Jameson Williams is finally realizing his full potential, and that's saying something because he always had it. He was just always hurt or suspended. Now he's healthy, and he's around, and he's cooking, and Detroit looks like the real deal in the NFC. Detroit and Minnesota feel like the 2 best teams in the conference as of this moment in time. When they face off in a couple weeks, I am very much looking forward to it. My picks went back on track. I went 11-5, and my overall record is 36-28. Coming up next will be the power rankings. Jacksonville, you are the last team standing without a win. You will also headline the zombie tier on my next train of thought.